Okay, um, I'm done with sarcasm now. I'm going to be extremely serious from this point on. I consider filmmaking the single greatest artistic medium that our species has ever devised, as it contains all other mediums within it. Movies are painting and sculpture and theater and literature and music made of light and projected in a dark room for all to see. And just like all of those other mediums, movies contain milestones. 2001 is a milestone in movie making, just like the Beatles were a milestone in music. And you don't have to like the Beatles in order to acknowledge this fact. 2001 attempts to address the existential crisis inherent in our consciousness. Why are we here? What is our purpose? Are we alone? Are we being watched? And you have the gall to think that just because there isn't enough dialogue to suit your comfort level, and just because the protagonist is an abstract rather than a person, and because nobody's taken your interpretation of Howard the Duck into consideration, that you not only get to dismiss its historical significance entirely, but you also deserve a seat at the table of conversation about the film while insulting the intelligence of every other person at that table. What you're not realizing here, Matthew, is that the concepts of good and bad simply no longer apply to it, save for the individual subjective experience. I can't stand Charlie Chaplin movies. I think they are boring and unfunny. However, I would never, in a million years, give one a negative review and then tell people not to see it. I lack the necessary sophistication required in order to enjoy his films, but since I understand this and do take into account all other factors around his films, I recommend them to everyone because watching them, like studying history, is never a bad thing. Am I getting through to you here? We live in a world plagued with a terrifyingly large swath of people whom refuse to see or acknowledge 2001 based solely on the fact that they regard evolution as a myth invented by Satan. The sophistication of the American audience, as evidenced by the success of movies such as Twilight New Moon and Transformers Part 2, is slipping ever lower with every overblown, over-budget Hollywood crapfest, and you are helping it along. If your review influences even one single young person to not go see 2001 and decide for themselves, you will have done and are doing damage, Matthew. It's simply irresponsible, and that is why I had to respond in kind. You ended your review with Scrabble and a dump truck. I'm going to end mine with a psychological study published in the September 2009 issue of the Journal of Psychological Science by the University of British Columbia and UC Santa Barbara. I'll be sure to put a link up on the screen or whatever so that everyone can see the article about the study for themselves. Entitled, "Reading a Book by Franz Kafka or Watching a Film by Director David Lynch Could Make You Smarter." According to the research by psychologists, exposure to surrealism in, say, Kafka's The Country Doctor or Lynch's Blue Velvet enhances cognitive mechanisms that oversee implicit learning functions. As part of their research, they asked a group of subjects to read an abridged and slightly edited version of Kafka's The Country Doctor, which involves a nonsensical and in some ways disturbing series of events. A second group read a different version of the same short story, one that had been rewritten so that the plot and literary elements made sense. The subjects were then asked to complete an artificial grammar learning task in which they were exposed to hidden patterns in letter strings. They were asked to copy the individual letter strings and then put a mark next to those that followed a similar pattern. People who read the nonsensical story checked off more letter strings. Clearly they were motivated to find structure. But what's more important is that they were actually more accurate than those who read the more normal version of the story. They really did learn the pattern better than the other participants did. So simply put, Matthew, attempting to understand nonlinear and surrealist storylines, like that of 2001, makes you better at understanding stories in general. Finally, I would just like to say that I hope that you see this video series for what it is. I'm not looking to start some kind of war with you here. I'm trying to help. I'm done.